Any sane, rational person today has cultivated an antipathy toward modern Hollywood. The sanctimony of its moral and political pontificating has been further vulgarized by expose after expose on all the hideous vices that money, fame, beauty, and power can buy. And amidst all this grotesque hypocrisy laid bare, Hollywood consistently manages to fail in its only purpose: to entertain. The glitz and glamour with which Tinseltown was once imbued has been reduced to mere lipstick on a pig. Not that Hollywood has ever been devoid of depravity beneath its gilded image. After the invention of the movie camera came the invention of the casting couch. The Garden of Allah was a permanent orgy, and sensational crimes scandalized its sun-baked streets, from Fatty Arbuckle to the Black Dahlia. Nevertheless, the romantic ideal of Hollywood's golden age still holds considerable sway over the public consciousness, and especially for myself, as steeped as I am in the era of silent and classical film, prior to the Second World War. Nor is it just the films themselves that capture my imagination, but the era itself. Hollywood, still new, erupting in luxuriant movie palaces and film studios. Los Angeles, robed in Art Deco and Mission Revival as the first truly new and modern city of the 20th century. California, the mysterious and awful desolation of the Mojave Desert, the scrubby basins and hills funneling you towards palm tree-fringed beaches and seaside amusement piers, roaring through the 20s, and the hoped-for Golden State at the end of Route 66's Rainbow during the Great Depression. I don't just watch the cinematic products of this time. I could even watch Hollywood newsreels for hours, dreaming of a sanitized version of its golden age. If I wasn't so trenchantly Canadian, and didn't know so many people who had themselves escaped from LA, I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to relocating. The distance between myth and reality, dream and decline, is echoed in Hollywood's finest meditation upon itself, 1950's Sunset Boulevard. Movies about movies are an interesting genre for the film aficionado. They can be enlightening from a purely historical perspective, say The Artist or Singin' in the Rain, giving us a glimpse into that critical moment in the history of film with the advent of talkies. More than that, though, they are Hollywood's reflection upon itself, constructing, or in some cases deconstructing, a romantic mythos around the film industry. As anyone who has subscribed to my channel for any length of time knows, another of my most favorite films is King Kong, which is not merely a movie about an expedition to a far-flung island to find a giant ape, but a movie about an expedition to a far-flung land to find a giant ape. It is itself an adventure about adventure filmmaking, a paean to the kinds of films made and lives lived by the same documentarians who made King Kong. It is a movie in love with movies. Sunset Boulevard is the other extreme. It is, in a sense, an expedition into a far-flung land to find a mysterious creature from the prehistoric past, but of a much different and more domestic kind. This journey into the unknown is demystifying and de-romanticized. It even begins with a corpse. Introducing William Holden as Joe Gillis, a corpse floating in the pool of a vine-covered old Hollywood mansion, who narrates for us the story of how he got there. This is the ghost of the Hollywood dream, victim of the Hollywood reality, speaking to us from beyond the grave, warning us to abandon all hope, ye who enter here. Joe is a hack writer of screenplays who has yet to find his big break. Not so much the break of someone willing to take a chance on him, but the break of something to inspire him to truly great writing. He has no story that he must tell, at least not while he's still alive. That is one of the bitterest ironies of Sunset Boulevard. Joe's one big story, the story that could make him, the story that only he could tell, is the story of his own death. On the lam from Repo Men, coming for his car, Joe hides out in the secluded estate of Norma Desmond at 10086 Sunset Boulevard. The actual mansion used for exterior shots was a long-abandoned and now demolished edifice at the corner of Wilshire and Irving, built by a Mexican sugar magnate in 1924 who only lived in it 1 year before moving back to Mexico. In 1936, the mansion was bought by industrialist J. Paul Getty, reportedly as a home for an ex-wife, but unoccupied save for a couple of caretakers until the building was demolished in 1957. The building, and its fake studio set interiors, are a character in their own right. The viewer today might mistake it for something gorgeous in its delightfully nostalgic Los Angeles Italian Renaissance style, but in 1950 it merely represented something old, worn, gaudy, a relic, claustrophobic and constraining, as spiritually contracting as its square footage is expansive, equivalent to how we might see a 1980s McMansion. The house is much like its occupant, a faded silent movie star who cannot bear a world that has passed her by, and reassures herself that it is because she is too good for it. At first startled by the intrusion, the haughty dowager seizes the opportunity of a writer delivered to her doorstep. She has a script she has been working on for her old director, Cecil B. DeMille. It is Salome, the biblical story of the young girl who danced the seven veils for a grotesque old King Herod and awarded the head of John the Baptist for her erotic display. Norma, at 50 years old, wants to dance the seven veils for Hollywood, imagining a grand and erotic comeback after essentially sitting out the 1930s and 40s. The script is abysmal, but Joe seizes the opportunity to doctor it for a few bucks. That's one of the undercurrents of Hollywood and this expose of it. Everyone is an opportunist. Joe is an opportunist looking to bilk this crazy old lady out of some money, until her opportunism entraps him. Authenticity is lent to the role of Norma Desmond by her actress, Gloria Swanson. Swanson's real life paralleled that of her fictionalized alter ego. She had become royalty at Paramount Studios during the silent era, only to have her career melt away with the arrival of sound. Swanson left Hollywood for New York, and ironically ended up on radio, until Sunset Boulevard's director, Billy Wilder, called her back. And she does an absolutely incredible job in the role. The real Gloria Swanson was not very much like Norma at all, despite their somewhat parallel careers. Swanson was a lively personality, not at all reclusive, active in theater and politics, and described as very much with the times. In fact, the biggest problem they had with her was that she looked too good. Swanson was a healthy, beautiful, and vivacious 50-year-old herself, and frankly, still a dish. But when she flicks that switch, Norma Desmond comes on, and Swanson leaps off the screen as one of cinema's largest characters. She is a wild-eyed predator, her clawed hands grasping onto a prey that thinks it is working her. And yet, she is a pitiable creature, awful, repugnant, clownish, and her insanity makes us feel sorry for her and the loss of old Hollywood that she represents. Everyone around her feels understandable pity and responsibility for her, including Joe, which is part of what keeps him in her clutches. Impossible to conceive, Swanson wasn't even the first choice for the role, or the second, or the third. Mae West turned it down first, then Greta Garbo, Paula Negri, Clara Bow, Norma Shearer, and then they thought better of even asking Mary Pickford. Ironically, the problem is that many of these preferred picks were too much like Norma Desmond. They either refused to allow themselves to be cast as a washed-up former starlet, or had lived that life too hard and wanted to retreat from the public eye. Swanson's career lent authenticity to the role in more ways than one. Norma's favorite obsession is herself. Every surface of her mansion is filled with framed photos of herself. She is not so much a person anymore as a reflection of an image from 20 years before, a mirror of fictions, an artifice of an artifice. Norma Desmond is kitsch. Her favorite pastime, into which she drags Joe, is watching her old movies in her private theater. It is a constant self-recycling, made ever more poignant in the current climate of endless remakes, sequels, and cinematic universes. Footage for these scenes was taken from Swanson's own 1932 film, Queen Kelly. That film had been, partly, directed by Erich von Stroheim, until he was fired by Swanson for running up costs and making creative decisions she strenuously disagreed with. This ill-fated relationship is recapitulated, in some sense, in Sunset Boulevard, where Erich von Stroheim plays the role of Max, Norma's butler, former director, and ex-husband. Just as Max created a fantasy world for Norma to star in on the silver screen, he now makes a fantasy world for her in the seclusion of her mansion, writing the fan letters and stoking a fraudulent perception of her lasting fame among a public that has, in truth, forgotten about her. Max is still the director of her life. Eventually, the relationship between Joe and Norma turns sexual, and he slips uncomfortably into the role of a gigolo. Her wealth provides him with a roof over his head and anything he could want, at the small price of his dreams and dignity. This is his casting couch. Tugging at him from outside of this small and dusty world of reminiscence and illusion and mutual exploitation is Betty, played by Nancy Olson. She is another functionary in the hustle and bustle of the studio system and strikes up a collaboration with Joe. She sees a spark of something in his work and wants to develop it, making her the polar opposite of Norma. Norma is old Hollywood, self-centered and self-indulgent, luring the writer to simply regurgitate what has already been done. Betty is new Hollywood, young and ready for new experiences and authentic voices. Norma wants to be in front of the camera. Betty is perfectly happy being behind it. Betty wants what is best for Joe, because she has genuinely fallen in love with him, despite being engaged to someone already, which is her character flaw. Norma even goes as far as threatening suicide to seduce, cajole, or blackmail Joe into servicing her, literally and figuratively. And, well, we know how it ends up. We began with Joe's body floating dead in Norma's pool. How did we get there? What is the third act to Joe's magnum opus? Few movies before or since have been so violent in stripping back the twinkling facade of Hollywood. No less than Louis B. Mayer himself, of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, exclaimed to Wilder that "You have disgraced the industry that made and fed you. You should be tarred and feathered and run out of Hollywood." Reportedly, Wilder responded with a tactical F-bomb. But the film is not so brutal that it completely strips away the nostalgia and romance of old Hollywood. Norma utters some of the most poetical descriptions of classical cinema ever penned.
I am big. It's the pictures that got small. We didn't need dialogue. We had faces. So just...
You see, this is my life. It always will be. There's nothing else. Just us. And the cameras. And those wonderful people out there in the dark.
The sound stages and the iconic Bronson Gate, as well as the sadly departed Schwab's Pharmacy, famous hangout of Hollywood's underclass. Hollywood is a character, the character, in Sunset Boulevard. It is a tragic reminiscence of a faded, dowager era of cinema, of everything it has ceased to be, what it is unable to become, and what that does to people. Two final notes in connection with Sunset Boulevard. First, a stand-in for Norma was given an uncharacteristically happy ending, or happy enough, in a 1959 episode of The Twilight Zone titled 16mm Shrine. Ida Lupino plays a Norma-like aged actress who refuses to accept the changing world around her and retreats into her old movies. Literally. Unsurprisingly, this is one of my favorite episodes of my favorite television series. And I say uncharacteristically happy because usually Rod Serling is pretty merciless on those men who cannot handle modernity and escape into fantasy, nostalgia, and ultimately death. He was feeling merciful to his Norma Desmond stand-in. Secondly, I first got into the Twilight Zone via the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror ride at Disney's California Adventure theme park. Ordinarily, I would stay as far away from a drop ride as practicable, given my healthy respect for gravity. But Tower of Terror was a practically perfect ride in its theme, its execution, and its setting. It perfectly captured the romance of Hollywood's golden age, thus perfectly capping off the Hollywood-themed section of the park. On the one hand, it captured the mystique of the time period, the elegance and glamour represented by Hollywood in the 20s and 30s. the lifestyle of leisure and affluence represented by a beautiful hotel like the Hollywood Roosevelt across the street from Grauman's Chinese Theater. On the other hand, it reflected on the melancholy of its passing. It is an elegant, affluent, glamorous Hollywood hotel in ruins, covered with dust and cobwebs, filled with ghosts of better days. It was the Sunset Boulevard of attractions. Sadly, the world passed it by too, and it was replaced with a Guardians of the Galaxy ride. Alas. As the film itself reminds us, the past cannot be a permanent residence, even if today is an alien and hostile place.